His Dark Material fans, I've got some bad news for you.
Unbelievable.
Season 2 may be out and that might be awesome, but the Magisterium has been keeping secrets from you. Luckily, you've got me to tell you everything about your favorite show they don't want you to know. His Dark Materials is a pretty big deal around the world. After the Game of Thrones finale betrayed fans harder than Lord Asriel, the world needed a new epic fantasy series full of conspiracies, factions, and a scene-stealing brunette who plays by her own rules. His Dark Materials was just waiting in the wings, ready for this moment to shine, and boy did it shine. While it was a big deal in the States, it was a big deal in the UK. Apparently, the series was the biggest show for the BBC in the last 5 years. In a world where Doctor Who exists and is throwing twists and new doctors left and right, that is incredibly impressive. Though I can't say I'm too surprised though. The show has giant armored polar bears and Hamilton. You can't really top that. His Dark Materials, unlike the movie adaptation, does a really great job of adapting the book series for the small screen. It takes time to establish the world and characters before launching into the fantasy adventure. If you haven't read the series, I have 2 important things to tell you. 1, go read the series right now because it's awesome. And 2, while most of the plot from season 1 was adapting the first book, an entire major subplot was actually adapting book 2. That would be the entire section featuring Will and Our Earth. This twist was huge for new fans because it was like, what? This fantasy series is doing us now? While old fans were like, what? They're doing Subtle Knife already? I'm sure that they've got even more surprises coming. So let's be honest here, you've probably seen the Disney Plus Hamilton at least, 30 times by now? And who can blame you? It's a work of Broadway genius constructed by one of the most charismatic celebrities out there right now. That being said, it was a little surprising that Lin-Manuel Miranda would drop by a fantasy drama that had very little rapping about American history or Mary Poppins in it. Turns out that Lin-Manuel Miranda is a big old nerd, and so is his wife. When the pair met, coincidentally, both were getting into His Dark Materials at the same time. According to him, we were falling in love with these stories as we were falling in love with each other. That's literally the cutest thing that I've heard in my entire life. It might surprise you to learn that His Dark Materials has been adapted more times than you might think. It was actually crafted into a beloved stage play, despite the fact that it has polar bear fights, hot air balloons, and magical demons running around everywhere. The His Dark Materials play killed it. Taking a page out of the Lion King's book, they used puppetry and stagecraft to lovingly recreate moments from the beloved fantasy series. So while you might think that Harry Potter and the Cursed Child broke new ground with adapting young adult fantasy for the stage, I gotta say His Dark Materials got there first. They also did so without weird time travel hijinks that didn't really make any sense. After the Harry Potter movies jumped onto the big screen and right into our hearts, everyone wanted to adapt every fantasy series until they hit it big with their own massively successful film franchise. Unfortunately, they failed pretty much all across the board.
That is heresy.
That is the truth.
Hollywood threw a ton of money at projects like Chronicles of Narnia, The Mortal Instruments, and Percy Jackson with mixed results. Perhaps the most loathed adaptation of the bunch is the watered-down His Dark Materials adaptation, The Golden Compass. While the film had an exceptional cast and a few good moments, its rushed pace and rejection of the greater themes of the series pushed fans away, making the film fail at the box office. Still, it wasn't as bad as that Percy Jackson movie. I will never stop being angry about that one. When it comes to your giant CGI polar bears, casting a good voice actor is about the most important thing that you can do. While most fans didn't care for The Golden Compass, we can all agree that they killed it with the casting of Sir Ian McKellen and Ian McShane. Both actors brought their characters to life with epic performances that sounded about what you would expect polar bear warriors to sound like. It was one of the few areas where we were all worried about how they would top it, but they pulled it off.
I've come here to give you a real fight.
His Dark Materials definitely follows the recent trend of making television shows look more like movies. Game of Thrones, The Mandalorian, and practically everything on Netflix these days reject the mainstream television aesthetic for that expensive cinematic look. His Dark Materials decided to double down on this with director Tom Hooper. The famed director of The King's Speech, Les Mis and The Danish Girl, lent his Oscar-winning eye to the series, allowing for a more professional aesthetic for the series. Just don't make his Dark Materials look like cats. Nothing should ever look like cats. While the United States and the United Kingdom are very similar in a lot of ways, there are a lot of small, silly differences between the two countries. For reasons that defy logic, book titles are often one of these differences. For example, while the American name for the first Harry Potter book features the Sorcerer's Stone, the British version is the Philosopher's Stone. Well, his Dark Materials has the same problem. In America, the first book is known as The Golden Compass, while in Great Britain the title is Northern Lights. While Northern Lights is the preferred title from the creator of the series, The Golden Compass is still the main way people refer to the book. If you didn't already know this, be warned that the most minor of minor spoilers is coming. Lin-Manuel Miranda and Andrew Scott apparently spent quite a lot of time filming together in season 2. This led to a bromance between the two beloved actors and jealousy from their friends and significant others. You see, all of Scott's friends were jealous that he got to spend time with Alexander Hamilton himself. Meanwhile, Miranda was flooded with text messages from his wife about how he was in close proximity to the hot priest from Fleabag right after it premiered on Amazon. I mean, just look at the infamous Neil scene from season 2. Honestly, can you blame his wife? It seems kind of crazy to think about today, but there was once a time when the biggest thing people were worried about was the evil messages hiding behind harmless fantasy novels. For quite a long time, many people thought that the Harry Potter franchise was going to turn people to witchcraft. In a similar fashion, his Dark Materials was attacked for some of its complicated themes some felt were inappropriate for children. These were likely the same parents who showed their children the terrifying riverboat scene from Willy Wonka without worrying that it was nightmare fuel that would haunt us forever. Luckily, there hasn't been much outcry about the His Dark Materials show. I mean, now shows like The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina are popular and no one really cares. It's almost like there are more important things to worry about. As much as we love Lyra and Lee Scoresby, you gotta admit that 90% of the characters in His Dark Materials suck. I mean, they're very well written and interesting, but they're mostly just the worst people. I mean, you know it's bad when Mrs. Coulter is one of the nicer people in the Magisterium. Father McPhail is no exception. Fortunately, the real actor, Will Keane, seems like a good dude. While he isn't a father in the priest sense of the word, he's a father in like the father sense of the word. Lyra actress Daphne Keane is actually Will Keane's daughter. Nothing says father-daughter bonding like a massively successful fantasy series, right? If you don't know anything about author Phillip Pullman, just know that he's not exactly the most laid-back dude. Despite the fact that he's written a fantasy series that is largely marketed toward children, he's a very well-read intellectual human being. This is clear when you find out where his inspiration for His Dark Materials comes from: John Milton's Paradise Lost. The epic poem, which retells the story of the biblical origins of the earth and the devil, features a quote that sounds awfully familiar. So group around, kids, and be prepared to snap, for it's time for another edition of the ScreenRant Poetry Corner. Unless the Almighty Maker them ordain His Dark Materials to create more worlds, into this abyss the wary fiend stood on the brink of hell and looked a while, pondering his voyage, for no narrow frith he had to cross. Oh, that's right. Snap for me. Lord Asriel and Lyra have a lot more in common than just being father and daughter, aside from the fact that both of them are more stubborn than an armored bear. Both actors, James McAvoy and Daphne Keane, had major roles in the XMen franchise. Daphne Keane had a star-making role out-Wolverining Hugh Jackman's final Wolverine in Logan. Meanwhile, James McAvoy had an Xavier versus Xavier duel in X-Men Days of Future Past with Sir Patrick Stewart himself. Since both actors co-starred with Stewart, I humbly throw in his name for the voice of Metatron for this series. If you don't know who that is yet, oh, just wait. I won't spoil it. It's very clear that the makers of His Dark Materials love the book series. While most series make you wait until the show actually gets going to show this love, His Dark Materials drops hints in the opening credits. If you look closely at the title sequence, you can see a brief shot of a knife and a spyglass, references to the books The Subtle Knife and The Amber Spyglass. HBO is the king of title sequences though, so that's no surprise. The Game of Thrones titles are still legendary. I'm playing them right now, and even though there's no music going, I bet you still hear the music, huh? Of all the concepts in His Dark Materials, perhaps the most original are the fluffy animal demons that follow everyone around. These creatures not only provide adorable comic relief and revelations about the characters they follow, but they're also very important to the plot. So where exactly do these little things come from? Well, it should come as no surprise that Phillip Pullman took inspiration from something profound for his fantasy series. That would be Leonardo da Vinci's painting, Lady with an Ermine, which features a lady with an odd animal. He's not the only one who takes the inspiration from Da Vinci, though. The famous paintings that depict Leonardo da Vinci's deathbed inspire this very channel. I mean, doesn't it just look like they're discussing the 25 things you missed in Avengers Endgame? I certainly think so. Lord Asriel and Mrs. Coulter might have one of the weirdest relationships in all of pop culture. Their doomed romance provided little happiness for either of them, but did produce a beautiful world-saving child in Lyra. Similarly, James McAvoy and real-life ex-wife Anne-Marie Duff came together to create something wonderful. Both actors appeared on His Dark Materials. While McAvoy was obviously Asriel, you might not know that Anne-Marie Duff appeared as Matt Costa. Which do you think did a better job, His Dark Materials is a series all about Lyra forming alliances between desperate peoples and alternate universes to take on an oppressive force. It's kind of funny then to think that His Dark Materials was actually created by a similar alliance. This very expensive series featuring cinematic CGI, movie stars, and a ton of locations was created by an alliance between two major networks. The BBC, which is known for shows like Luther, Doctor Who, and Peaky Blinders, united with the Game of Thrones, Sopranos, and Watchmen home HBO. Talk about universes colliding, because now HBO Max features all of HBO's shows and plenty of BBC series. I'm not saying that HBO Max is a metaphor for His Dark Materials, but I'm not saying that either. So in a world where The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King won like all the Oscars, how did Game of Thrones end up on television? While it seems like a natural fit today, the choice to do a big fantasy show like that on HBO seemed like a bit out there back in 2011. So how exactly did that happen? Well, the Golden Compass is why. Evidently, George R.R. Martin so hated the adaptation of Phillip Pullman's book that he decided that Game of Thrones was too big for the big screen. Turns out that this worked out for everyone, as the famous fantasy series' massive small-scale success paved the way for a His Dark Materials comeback. So what does Martin think about the new adaptation? He loves it. Is it any surprise that he likes armored bears? Come on. Back in the day, the most common comparisons people made to His Dark Materials was to fantasy series like The Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia. While most people would consider these comparisons to be incredible compliments, Phillip Pullman did not. He claimed that Lord of the Rings was for children and that Chronicles of Narnia was offensive. These feelings are so deep that His Dark Materials is often called the anti-Lewis. For the record, I am 100% down for any comparisons to C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien, though you just know that Tolkien's YouTube videos would be at least 4 hours long with multiple endings.
Part of your outfit for tonight?
If you're like me, you read the entire His Dark Materials trilogy before the series even came out. If you're also like me, after you finished this series and the first season, you ran into the problem of having no more His Dark Materials to binge. While this is quite the problem, Phillip Pullman's gotcha. There are actually a few follow-ups to His Dark Materials that you may not know about. Lyra's Oxford is a short book that follows Lyra after the trilogy is ended. It isn't a huge story, but it will definitely quench your thirst if you need more of the series. Then there's Once Upon a Time in the North, which is a novella which tells you how Lee Scoresby and Eoric Burnison met, a plotline that I hope gets adapted into the series. Could we ever get enough of Scoresby and Burnison? That's a trick question because no, we can't. As far as His Dark Materials goes, if you want to truly be caught up, then you also have to follow the new book series, The Book of Dust. This is a new trilogy that continues Lyra's journey to take on the Magisterium. While the first 2 books in the series are out, the third hasn't even been titled yet, so there's a lot more His Dark Materials to come. Hopefully The Book of Dust gets adapted next. Let's be honest, it's nice that they're staying so true to the series, but 3 seasons is not nearly enough. If you haven't seen the His Dark Materials Comic-Con panel yet, go do so now. It's full of great behind-the-scenes stuff and fun commentary from the cast. My favorite part though is Ruth. Ruth Wilson had a strategically placed stuffed animal, one that looked a great deal like Mrs. Coulter's demon. I'm sorry, but that's adorable, and also kind of creepy. His Dark Materials is a book series that focuses pretty hard on Lyra most of the time, so that means that the television series has a lot of room to create scenes featuring other characters. One of the best of these new scenes came from when we got to see Serafina and Farter Coram actually meet up. It's a cute scene that adds quite a lot to the world and characters, though I've got to admit, Serafina aged a lot better. HBO is one of those networks that rarely likes to reuse actors. You can tell that from the absolutely needless cameo from Deadwood's Ian McShane in Game of Thrones that he even thought was out of nowhere. His Dark Materials is no different, featuring actors like James Cosmo and Lucian Mizmotti from Game of Thrones in the series. Not only that, but Lyanna Mormont herself, Bella Ramsey, is set to appear next. I doubt that she'll be quite as cool though. It can be nerve-wracking to get into television shows these days. Epic shows like Altered Carbon, Stumptown, and The Dark Crystal all got the axe long before they should have. You just never know when your favorite shows might get taken out before their time. Well, I've got good news for you, because His Dark Materials will not be such a show. Work on Season 3, which will adapt the final book in the series, is already in development, so expect an epic ending in this series that will give you that satisfaction most of your favorites didn't live long enough to give you. It's such a great time to be a good His Dark Materials fan, right? Well, if you, like me, can't get enough of the series, then click and subscribe to more videos like it from us here at ScreenRant. See ya!